Hello, good morning, and welcome to MACMH's Community Podcast Series. We're here to inform, inspire, and support. I'm the host, Tawana Anderson, also the Community Engagement Director here with MACMH, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to tune in. Here, we invite our partners to join us for conversations about their organization's service to the community, challenges they are facing, and their future plans, all the while weaving throughout the ideas to help you have an impact on a child's mental health journey. Just a few things that I want to add before we get started. We are streaming this episode live, but it will be available anytime you feel like learning something about children's mental health and the community that serves them. If you enjoy this video, please help spread the word. This is actually our very first podcast episode, and we may be just a little bit nervous. So hang in there with us. The very first one is also always a little challenging, but we are going to work through it together. Also, during this episode, we will make references to books, articles, other information that will support the knowledge that you'll gain during our time together today. You will find those links in our description, along with contact information for our guests, so you can stay connected. I also want to encourage the audience to respectfully ask questions for our guest in the YouTube chat. We'll keep an eye on things and we'll see if our guests would like to answer if there's any time at the end. But just want to let you know that live chat option is there if you're here with us in YouTube. Excuse me. All right, so let's talk about this podcast here. The Minnesota Association for Children's Mental Health has a mission to promote and pursue optimal mental health from infancy to young adulthood. Every topic of this podcast is approached with an open and critical mind, exploring opportunities to view circumstances through a different lens. Being in this space means we advocate for all children to have equal access and opportunities to develop the skills to nourish their lives. We begin to help others remove their blinders while we're also being challenged to remove our own. We need to see other people, appreciate their perspectives, and perhaps even learn from their journeys. We will center our conversation around infant and early childhood mental health principles used by Minnesota's Montessori family, how they nurture and support children's mental health, as well as the staff serving their children and their distinctive connections to the community. That's why I love Montessori. Let's just meet our guest here. Today, we have two special guests, Nora Springer and Molly O'Shaughnessy. Nora Springer is the Director of Outreach and Licensed Social Worker for the Montessori Center of Minnesota. She provides mental health consultations, social emotional intervention support, and resource and referral services to Cornerstone Montessori Community and MCM's Initiative Montessori Partners serving all children and all of those partner schools. We'll get really into that as we bring Nora and Molly on. Prior to the MCM, she worked with Early Head Start and Head Start at CAPRW in St. Paul. Nora holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire and a master's in social work from the University of Minnesota here in the Twin Cities. Molly is the co-director of Pedagogy. And they're going to have to pronounce that for us again. I hope I did that right. And the age 3 to 6 primary training. Molly is an accomplished AMI trainer, consultant, and lecturer. She has led the Montessori Center of Minnesota for 25 years of expansion, growing a teacher training center into a movement to bring high quality Montessori education to hundreds of under-resourced children and communities. In 2008, Molly opened MCM's campus in the Payne-Phalen neighborhood in East St. Paul. The campus includes an early childhood center, a teacher's training center, and a one-of-a-kind Montessori museum. A noted authority in the field of Montessori training, she is in demand as a speaker nationally and internationally. She has presented keynotes and workshops across the United States, Australia, Canada, China, Europe, and Mexico. We are so happy to have her here to have this conversation with us. Molly has consulted on several Montessori projects nationally and internationally with a master's degree in education from Loyola in Maryland and a bachelor's degree from the College of St. Scholastica. She serves as community faculty for Metropolitan State University and served as an adjunct faculty for St. Catherine University for several years, one of my favorite places. In June of 2016, she was given the Early Childhood Honors Award by the Start Early Funders Coalition for her unwavering dedication to improving the lives of young children and their families. She also received the Wisdom of the Elders Award granted by the Montessori Accreditation Council for Teacher Education in recognition of leadership throughout the Montessori community as an educator, writer, and innovator. Oh my goodness. All right, so we're going to bring in Molly and Nora to
Good morning.
hi. How are
Good
y'all
morning.
doing?
Great. We're so happy to be here.
Yes,
I'm
so
so
excited.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you. I feel like that introduction took a long time, but I definitely wanted to make sure that we set the stage for you two who are here to share so much about this wonderful organization that you all work for. Now, let me just say that, and I think I've told you this story before, my son went to a Montessori school before starting kindergarten here. We had just moved from Arizona, and it was the School for Young Children. I reached back and found out what the name is. I don't know if you remember that, Molly. That's going back. My son is in his 30s now. So the School for Young Children was in St. Andrew's Cathedral. I was impressed by the foundation that he got there. And I remember his teacher telling me, like right away, you need to keep your son in private school because he will be lost. He will be lost in public school. And I think she was right. Even as I've talked to him about it since he's been an adult, he says the same thing. He probably should have been in private school.
It's a beautiful story.
He's a wonderful guy. So let's start with you guys. I'm just going to ask you both. And Molly, you can go first, or Nora, you can go first. I want to just hear about your journey. Like, tell us about your career and the journey that you've had that's taken you to this moment.
Okay, yeah. See, and my journey started long before Nora's. Maybe I should I should start. So my career in Montessori started when I took the first Association Montessori International training in 1973. And both of my trainers were directly trained by Dr. Montessori. Mr. Hulston, who was director of training, he was a Dutchman, and he was Montessori's personal representative in India. So he would travel back and forth between Minnesota and India to do a training. And so after I took the training in 73, I actually ended up teaching in a school that my father had founded in 1963, which was, I'll talk a little bit about that later. So after working there for several years, in 1988, I went on the training side. And it's quite a rigorous process to become a Montessori trainer. The headquarters are in Amsterdam. That's where Dr. Montessori last lived, and that's where the association is right now. And there is a committee, which I subsequently served on, that oversees people learning to be trainers. It's kind of like an apprenticeship. You work on 2 to 3 courses, and you write lectures, and you redo your albums with trainers' notes, etc. So then I've been training ever since, and I've never looked back. Throughout my training, one thing that stood out, Mr. Hulston continually talked about the social revolution that Montessori talked about. She was always about social reform, especially around children and their rights. And so I keep that, and that's what inspired me way back then and continues to inspire me throughout my entire now 50 years in this work. So that's how my journey began.
That's amazing. Like, that is truly amazing. I love the fact that you knew you were called to your purpose pretty early in your life, and you've been able to stay with it and really see your vision grow within this organization. So that's pretty awesome. I love that. Nora, it's your turn.
Yeah, well, while I was trying to think about my journey to Montessori, mine only started like 6.5 years ago when I kind of stumbled into this position. But I think something my parents always instilled in me was to follow your interests and see where that leads. And so I was always interested in working with children, and have just followed that path to see where it takes me. But, I grew up in rural Wisconsin. We didn't have any money, but I knew that my parents loved me fiercely, and I grew up in a community where you showed up for each other, and where community took care of us and we took care of each other. And even, when I go home to visit my parents, you never know who's going to drop in for a cup of coffee or bring over some eggs. And so I think community is really what drives me in thinking about, especially the 0 to 6 ages, because we need to be within family systems and within community to be able to support our children, to be able to be successful in life. And so I think my work as a home visitor with Early Head Start, and then in the classrooms with Head Start, really gave me really important fundamental knowledge of early childhood systems, especially within the state of Minnesota, and what policy and advocacy looks like. And then I kind of stumbled into this position in doing social work with MCM and with Cornerstone and with our Montessori partners. And it's just, the more I've gotten to audit Molly's lectures and Liza's lectures and kind of dive into the why behind the method, I've just grown to really love and understand and feel very passionate about this opportunity for all children. So yeah, that's a little bit about where I come from.
And that's really, you say that and I've got goosebumps, but sitting and meeting with both of you, I can feel the passion and the commitment that you have to children and their families. And even beyond that, the people who work with you, like the people who are serving your families, everyone is so passionate about the work that you're doing. And so as someone who's on the outside looking in, that passion is appreciated and it's felt. I can honestly feel it from y'all. So thank you very much. And before we dive into, what we're going to talk about, I just want you to share something interesting about yourself, something that we wouldn't find on your resume. And Nora, you've kind of already told us some interesting, tidbits about yourself, but what should we know about you that maybe we wouldn't find on your resume? You want to share something?
Sure. I grew up playing piano and playing for church services, but I think my one nerdy claim to fame is that I went to pipe organ camp in high school and got to work with some of the nation's leading organists and travel around Minnesota to see a bunch of incredible pipe organs. And it's my one, nerdy claim to fame that I kind of forget about, but really opened my eyes to a new side of music that I really fell in love with. So,
oh my gosh, Nora. And so, I lived in Arizona for a while, worked with United Food Bank back there. And so with my work there, I found it's like this pizza restaurant. It's called Organ Stop Pizza. And it's the biggest organ, pipe, the system is amazing. I'm going to send you the link.
Okay.
Nora, so now that I know that's a little nerdy passion of yours, I'm going to share that place with you. So if you're ever in Arizona, in the East Valley, you'll be able to visit. It's an amazing.
I'll look it up right away. Yes.
Organ Stop Pizza.
Yeah.
So Nora, I played the organ growing up too, but I'm sure I'm not accomplished like you were. Maybe you can give me some lessons now that we're in partnership, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So one kind of thing you wouldn't see on my resume, and it's a long story, which I won't tell, but I graduated from a college I never attended. So I know, isn't that kind of amazing? Do you want me to quickly tell you why or how?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. My freshman year in college, I went to the University of Mexico City. And then after that, I came back and went to McAllister College for 2 years. And then the training. So I took a leave of absence to do a 2-year Montessori training in 1973. And at that time, the foundation, which was sponsoring the training, had a partnership with St. Scholastica in Duluth. And so I got my senior year credit for that 2 years work from St. Scholastica and graduated, but I never attended St. Scholastica. And so a little bit later in life, my husband, Mike, drove me up there and he says, okay, you got to at least stand in front of the sign here and let me take a picture of you at St. Scholastica. So that's something you won't find on my resume.
That's an awesome story though, Molly. That was before virtual was even heard of. So the fact that you could have done that back then is amazing. That's awesome. All right. So you all are listening to a Minnesota Association for Children's Mental Health podcast. We're leading with knowledge, compassion, and support. Please take a moment to follow our channel, subscribe, turn on your notifications for future episodes, all that good stuff. And thank you for joining us. I'm going to, because we do actually have some people in the stream, in case anyone is sending any questions, I'll make sure that I'm keeping an eye out on that. All right. So Molly, let's jump into the real history. We got a little bit through your bio and kind of the introduction of yourself, but your school has a unique history and you have been intimately connected from the beginning. What else can you share that we didn't learn before? Tell us about the history of MCM, and I'm calling it MCM. It's the Minnesota Center Montessori Center of Minnesota.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell us all about how your school was created and your connection to it.
Okay, I think I will do that, but I think it's important to go back a little bit further in the history because it's really important what happened in Minnesota prior to the Montessori Center of Minnesota as we see it today. There was an early revival of Montessori schools in the 1960s. Here in the United States. My father, Larry O'Shaughnessy, was very involved with starting some of those early schools. And people don't know this, but at that time, there was federal funding for low-income neighborhoods to start Montessori schools. So they were very involved with that. So there's always been a commitment way back, even way back to the beginning of Montessori in 1907, to serving children who did not have all the resources that they deserved. So the foundation of Montessori principles are actually grounded in with the work that Montessori did in her early years with children who suffered trauma and neglect and poverty. They were orphaned. They were devastated by war, etc. So way back after her graduation from medical school in 1896, she began to work with children who had experienced adversity and trauma, as well as children who were developmentally delayed. So early on in her career, she was recognized as an expert in childhood mental illness, and she continued over years to be involved with children who suffered significant trauma, including children who lived in extreme poverty, etc., children who had survived horrible earthquakes, etc. So as a medical doctor, she began working with children who had been institutionalized. At that time, they were in asylums mixed with adults. There were no services like we see today. So these children had disabilities, but they were given very little stimulation, etc. And she used techniques with some of these children that she developed by looking at others who worked with children with disabilities, namely Itard, who worked with the wild child of Avrion, and Sagan, his protege. And she adapted these materials for these children, very hands-on materials, because what she said, and she continued to say, is that children needed education, not medication. And so she became interested in how children develop and how they grow. Child psychology was a new branch of science at that time. And so the origins of Montessori schools, as we know them today, really began in a very impoverished area in Italy. In 1907, she became part of a community development project, and the Italian Building Society had a plan to improve this very impoverished district in San Lorenzo, which is just outside of Rome. And she was asked to direct a daycare center for children who were preschool age because their parents needed to work. So the daycare was actually in the building where they lived. And she had actually been more interested in elementary age children, but she thought, well, this would be an opportunity to see how these children responded to these materials that she had used with the children with disabilities. Because at that time, most people believed that children under the age of 6 can't be taught. And she thought that as well. So the women who ran this center, they weren't teachers. Intentionally, she didn't want them to be teachers. She showed them how to use the materials and how to show them to the children. But these materials were only available part of the day. They were locked away in a cabinet, and then they would bring them out and let the children work with them. And Montessori said, I want you to observe what they do, how they work with these. And she, of course, came and observed the children too. And one day, maybe providentially, the cabinet was unlocked, and the children living there, they just came and took those materials out and started working with them. And she realized at that point that children knew what they were interested in. And so eventually they came out of the cabinets and became on shelves, et cetera, that children could choose, et cetera. She also noticed something really interesting. I have here, this is, I don't know if you can see, it's a cylinder block. It has to do with matching up, it's exploring dimension for children. It's a wooden block, and the children can take these cylinders out, mix them up, and then discriminate and put them back in. Well, she observed this one little 3-year-old child working with this cylinder block, and she saw this deep concentration, which nobody thought children had at that time, that they could concentrate. And so the little girl kept repeating this over and over again. And so she started counting how many times the child did this. And she counted 42 times. And nobody interrupted. Often we interrupt children, and now more than ever, we interrupt them from, total engagement. And but so she thought, oh my goodness, they have this deep interest in this. So that led to some of the freedoms that we see in a Montessori environment. She realized that they had so she allowed them to have the freedom to choose what they wanted to work with, which, children choosing what they work with is not something even today that we see all that often, do we?
No, we don't. Children don't have a lot of choice at all.
No, that's absolutely true, and that's key to the Montessori method. But so she also granted them the freedom to move around, because we know now what she intuitively knew, the connection between movement and intellectual development. And so they had the freedom to choose, they had the freedom to move, and they had the freedom to repeat as often and as long as they needed to in order to really understand a concept. But what got her the most was that this kind of new personality emerged with these children. They were self-disciplined, they were cooperative, they were independent, and they were kind and generous with each other. And she said that's actually what motivated her to leave her medical career and devote the rest of her life to understanding how children develop and what kind of environments are best suited for them to naturally develop. And then after that, starting with the 3 to 6-year-olds, it moved up to elementary and then down to younger children. And actually, before she died, she had created a blueprint for adolescents that have been implemented in parts of the world. So that's a little bit. I thought that history was really important, particularly because of your mission and vision in helping and supporting children in their mental health, etc. So I thought that was interesting.
Very interesting. And over 100 years later, I don't know that we have all embraced the fact that children are always learning. From the moment of conception, learning happens. Like, it may be innate, it may be something that is directly wired into, the mom, but learning begins from the very beginning. And I don't know that we're embracing that even to this day.
No, I agree. And then, so it continued to grow in the United States, but it didn't necessarily continue to serve children in communities that were under-resourced. It tended to gravitate a little more towards, more affluent communities. And in 2001, I did a keynote on education and peace. And as I prepared for that, I realized that we really needed to get back to the roots of Dr. Montessori's work, where she started, where she always said, she was most comfortable in the communities that she started way back in 1907. So we kind of thought a great deal about it, and our vision grew. And so, so often people would say, well, Montessori works because, children come from enriched families, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we know that Montessori actually works for all children. And so we said, okay, we need to move the training center, which was on the west side. It was a great training center, but we moved intentionally to the east side and opened a school, Cornerstone, which we'll talk a little bit more about, and it's side by side with the training. And that's how it kind of started. We started with one toddler community and one children's house, and then we added a second children's house, and then partnered to help found the elementary charter. But Nora can talk a little bit more about how many schools there are in the United States, or how many in the United States and Minnesota. So if you could share a little bit about that, Nora, it'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, I read that there are 4,500, maybe more than 4,500 Montessori schools in the United States. How many do we have here in Minnesota? And then what makes, Cornerstone unique, Nora?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Montessori isn't a trademarked name, so anyone can really use it. So that's where it gets a little bit difficult to track how many there are, and is it Montessori inspired? Is it what does that look like? So anyone can put Montessori on their name, but what we really look at is teacher training and the authenticity of the pedagogy within the classroom. And so we are, like, Molly mentioned, we're accredited through AMI, which is the Association Montessori International. And so that's what makes us different as a center. AMI is the training that Maria Montessori founded herself. And so when our teachers go through our training program, they receive an international diploma, which is recognized globally. And so within that training, we work with around 30-ish, maybe a little bit more, Montessori schools in the region to support our student teaching and observation and other collaboration. And so the number is a little bit vague for how many there are because the name is so loosely used. But like Molly said, we're located on the east side of St. Paul very intentionally to be able to serve the community and to really live out our mission of increasing access to Montessori, both for the children of Cornerstone and also to support a racially diverse and socioeconomically diverse teacher training pipeline. And, in Minnesota here, we pride ourselves on our high quality education system, but we also have some of the widest achievement and opportunity gaps when you look at race and income level. And so that is something that we have really intentionally worked towards, whether it's, like I said, with the children, providing scholarships for them to attend Cornerstone, and then really reducing financial barriers to be able to attend teacher training, both for tuition and a living stipend. But we believe strongly that high quality Montessori education should be available to all children. And so we look at this through from a wide holistic lens. And so this is both what we're looking at for Cornerstone, and then Cornerstone was the first of now what is 10 Montessori Partners schools. The initiative is called Montessori Partners Serving All Children. And they're individuals and communities who have come, who we've built relationships with, who have said, we want Montessori for our community. We are going to establish it with and for and by the community. And we, as MCM, are here to support that mission. And so we do that through a partnership agreement where we provide holistic support, such as mentorship and social work support, along with scholarships for teacher training. And then we support with technical assistance for startup and sustainability, like finding a space, supporting to think about the layout, if there's remodeling that's needed. So it's a whole there's a whole big phase of the startup that we support, and then startup doesn't matter if you don't also intentionally look at sustainability, and so that's kind of our holistic lens.
Well, that's amazing. That's really great because it's easy to start something. It's harder to keep it going. So being able to add that sustainability part to it, I think is amazing. And this is really what drew me to y'all, Nora. We ran into each other at a conference, and I hadn't even thought in my head, oh yeah, my son was part of this whole Montessori thing all these years ago. I didn't even think about that. But I appreciate your approach to learning for our children. And it's not so much the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s, even though that's very important for our children, but it's more about just living your life in the best way that you can live it, and bringing our children up from the very beginning to understand that life is yours to make. And so that's what I love about Montessori, and the approach that you have, starting with the children and the families, the connection to community, and then building upon real mental health practical terms and knowledge, so that not only are you teaching your children how to organize things and keep things clean. And like, if you've never been to a Montessori school, you must visit one. They are amazing, amazing places. And your campus is awesome, by the way. So you talked about the Montessori Partners serving all children, a very unique partnership with schools and organizations. Talk a little bit more about that program, if you could, Nora and Molly, so we can understand, because the point of this podcast is to bring things to the community that they might not know is there for them. So the fact that y'all have these wonderful partnerships with schools who are going into communities specifically to serve specific communities, I want you to talk a little bit more about that, if you could.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I'll talk about our partners, and then maybe we can get into some of the values of Montessori, which is kind of what brought some of our partners to reclaim those roots of Montessori.
Your principles are very specific and powerful. So definitely let's talk about that as well.
Yeah,
maybe we should start with that. Molly, do you want to jump in?
Maybe we should start with that so that we can see the relevance to the Montessori partners. So one thing that's important to note as we discuss these principles is how they are aligned with your values at Minnesota Association of Children's Mental Health. I find that extremely enlightening and wonderful. So the Montessori approach focuses on fostering a child's natural curiosity, independence, and love of learning. And some of the key elements, the very most basic key element, is deep respect for each individual child, and that we create a supportive and nurturing environment. We refer to it as an oasis of peace. And we call it a children's house rather than a school. It's as you were saying, it's where children can live their lives as nature intended, them to do. So it's especially designed, and it also focuses on individualized learning, which accommodates different styles of learning and different paces of learning. And we know this is really critical for all children, especially responding to neurodiversity in children, to be able to look at the needs and how each child learns. So this isn't a curriculum-based method; it's an observational-based method. And so the teachers are trained very specifically on how to observe children and what to look for in order to know what might be the thing that would interest them or hook them into being interested in it. So that focusing on the needs of individual children rather than just a collective is really an important part of Montessori. It's a holistic approach. Obviously, we do care about intellectual development and cognition, but equally important are their social and emotional and physical growth. So we have three basic things we talk about these environments, and I know when you visited, you saw this in the environment, and that is beauty, order, and simplicity. So this allows children to feel safe. It limits their choices to not having a lot of clutter. When we have too many choices, it's very difficult to make a choice. I mean, just think about going into Gap to get a pair of jeans, and there's like 42 different types of jeans. What do? We walk away, right? Because we can't make a choice. The same is true with children. If they have a lot of clutter and too many choices, it actually stops him from making choices. So that's a really important thing. We don't want overstimulation. We want this to be a nurturing and calm environment. And the way the materials are organized developmentally from left to right, what this comes here and this come next. Children can look at that and say, oh, I've done this. This is what I'm going to do next. So they are actually witnessing their own developmental progress rather than being told by an adult how they're doing, etc. The materials have, a control of error in them, so they can see their own mistakes rather than an adult telling them they've done something wrong. And when you can see your own mistakes and fix them, that's very empowering. So these environments are intentionally prepared for safety, kindness, and respect. The ability to collaborate to mixed ages, that's critical in a Montessori environment. We have 3 to 6-year-olds together, and they must have freedom, as I talked about, the freedom to choose within limits, of course. The limit is they can't just take anything. They have to be shown how to do it, and then they're free to take it. So they have those materials based on interest, etc. And like I said, that freedom to repeat, which leads to concentration. And deep concentration and focus has helps children to regulate themselves. It has a very calming effect on children. It does on adults as well. I mean, I know when I'm deeply concentrated, maybe on writing a speech or something like that, it really centers me. And I think we see that not only in children, but in adults as well. And Montessori saw many children who suffered from what we today would call dysregulated behaviors. And what she says, the kind of best thing to help with that is, and these are really her words, an interesting piece of work or activity, freely chosen, based on interest, often involving use of the hand, with the possibility of freedom to repeat as long as necessary. So that's really, a key aspect of it. Hands-on is very, very important. They need a 3-dimensional world. Very often now children live in a two-dimensional world, screens, worksheets, etc. But it's very different when they can actually take a 3-dimensional cube and feel it, because they're very tactile, and then know the properties of what is a sphere, what is a cone, what is etc. So that's another important part. And then we also focus on, in the beginning, what we call practical life activities, both large motor and small motor, where children can learn to cook, to peel and cut vegetables, to sweep, to clean, all these things that help them become functionally independent. And that's where self-esteem really comes in. It's not stickers and those kinds of things. It's, I can do this. Yeah. I am capable. And so that's what we see in these children. They're empowered. They have self-confidence and self-esteem. And that's really what we want, especially for children who have experienced adversity in their life. There's actually a game called the silence game, which Montessori accidentally found out that children actually like silence. And there's a game we play, and it's very almost meditative. So all of these kinds of things really help with their social development, and they're able to deal with conflict, and they're empathetic towards one another. So those are just some of the basic principles that we follow as we prepare these very intentionally designed environments.
Molly, you said something about dysregulation, I think is the word, the way that you termed it, but regulation is a huge part of a child's development. And as I'm sitting here listening as someone who doesn't know all of these things, I want to make sure that the people who are listening to us know what these terms are as well. So when we talk about regulation within our child or children, what does that mean? And then how does what you just explained to us really focus or help children become better regulated?
Yeah. Well, I'll let Nora talk about this. She's an expert. I mean, I obviously understand, but she is really an expert in this. So Nora, why don't you explain some of those terms?
Yes, please, Nora.
Yeah. I mean, regulation is really the ability to be able to calm your body physically and to slow down a racing mind. I think, being as a social worker, I've struggled with terms of challenging behaviors and different ways that we categorize children's behavioral needs. And I think re-looking at it as a way of, regulating and dysregulation is a really a way to respect and honor the child's needs. And the goal is to not always be regulated, but to be able to move through dysregulation and in a healthy and adaptable way that is safe for the child and safe for their surroundings. And so, when we talk about regulation, it's really just about calming their bodies, calming our own bodies.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to be able to have not make necessarily impulsive actions, etc., to be able to control oneself that in a socially acceptable way, etc. And that's another reason these mixed ages help so much. The older children are really almost mentors to these younger children. And they say, well, in this children's house, this is how we behave, and those kinds of things. And, to Nora's point, we don't like to put adjectives on children, like, challenging children. Let's look at that from a different perspective. Children with challenges. That's very different than labeling a child as challenging. And so we like to avoid those kind of adjectives before the noun.
Yeah, that's one of the bigger things that I've learned as I've been studying what infant and early childhood mental health is, what it means, and how we can really help our children navigate mental health at such an early age, is that instead of looking at a child and saying, "What's wrong with you?" you look at them and say, "What is your behavior trying to tell me?" And so it doesn't now it grows from an issue with the child to, okay, how do I support this child to make it through whatever it is, this feeling that they're having? And that's what really stands out to me once you really understand what IEC is.
Yeah. Behavior is communication, right?
Yeah. And the one thing, what we do, I haven't mentioned yet in these environments, is we have little dramas. They're called grace and courtesy activities. Very often we expect children to be able to behave in a socially acceptable way, but they don't have the language, so we do little acting out things like how to introduce yourself, how to answer a phone, how to apologize, how to ask for help, how to observe, how to move and carry things. And so they're very attracted to these little dramas that we do. And then it gives them the power, because it gives them the words that they can use. What do you say when somebody is disrupting your work? Instead of just pushing them away. I mean, what words can we use? Something like, today I'd really rather work alone. Maybe tomorrow you can observe me. So this, and children at this age, they come to us at 3 with about 450 words, more or less, depending on their experience. By the time they leave us at 6, they have anywhere between up to 14,000 words. And so they're in this sensitive period for language. And so it's really important that we use a really very rich language. We don't dumb it down at all. We use and they learn through the context in which those words are. So we give them those tools in order to take care of themselves and to take care of others in the community and to take care of the materials They actually, that's why we show them how to take it off the shelf, how to use it, and how to clean it up and put it back. And so there's this whole cycle of work, of activities, and the children become extremely responsible for taking care of their environment, and then they love it. They love. I always tell this story. There's this pink tower. It's a series of 10 blocks where they build it from the largest to the smallest. And I observed this little girl, 3 years old. She built this pink tower. She stood back and looked at it, and she goes, "I love you, pink tower." It's because that they do. They love their environment, and when you love something, you engage with it, you care for it, etc. And that's why these children, people always ask me, how do you tell a good Montessori school? Okay, yeah, there are some things to look at, but the first thing I say is, when you observe the children, are they joyful? Are they happy, etc.?
Yeah, and your children always seem that way to me when I enter. I feel like I have gotten a little kind of an inside scoop into how things are ran with y'all, but every little thing is so important. And even as you're teaching children about regulating themselves, you're also helping them to support their friends, because it's one thing to always know, hey, I'm doing good over here, but now how do you support?
Yeah.
And I think that part of what you're teaching is important as well.
Well, and they're building their own community, which is really at the core of it. Molly, can you just clarify for people who maybe aren't familiar what you mean when you talk about children's work?
Oh, yeah, it's purposeful activity. Actually, it was the children who started calling it work. Because sometimes people will say, oh my God, they're going to have to work the whole rest of their life. Why'd have them work now? Why shouldn't they just play? Well, their activity is playful too. I mean, so it's really activity that is purposeful, that serves development. That's what we refer to as work, but that's exactly what it is. And what she also found is, and research has shown this as well, that children prefer real things. That if given the choice of, it's not that they don't like, pretend play and role playing. That's really important in development too. But when you give a child, a peeler to peel a carrot, they like to do the real thing because they are adapting to human, what it's like to be a human. And so they look at their elders and their caregivers, etc., and they want to be with them. This whole idea of just wanting to be with them side by side. And so it's so important that we give them, that opportunity, not only in the prepared environment or the children's house, but in our homes as well, as much as possible.
I always refer to my children as adults in training.
That's kind of it. Yeah, she said there's two main tasks that children have: to become, to construct themselves, and belong, to adapt to their place in history and time and their culture, etc. And that's why we can talk, Nora will talk a little bit more about why our partners are so much based on their cultural, not their cultural, their beliefs, their values, their artifacts, everything. That's so critical for our partner schools.
It is. And that's a great way to just kind of move into kind of expanding on that program, Nora, and how each of your Montessori schools connect to the community. The Montessori way means that there is a connection to community. And after our time together, because you are kind of the hub or the heartbeat, I think, of the Minnesota Montessori schools. Let's talk about that, the communities that they serve, and how you work with them in this new Partners Serving All Children program.
Yeah. So, I mean, it really started with Cornerstone when they opened in 2008, and then with the commitment to community, the two core community programs of MCM are Cornerstone, and then we also have a partnership with Opportunity Neighborhood on the east side of St. Paul, and twice a week we have a Montessori environment that is set up in the community center that is free for parents and children to attend on the east side of St. Paul. We call it our Birth to 5 Early Childhood program, and and it's really an opportunity for parents to experience Montessori with their children from that holistic perspective. So and those two programs have been going strong and steady and growing ever since. And so from those origins, the next two episodes actually will feature, well, the next 3 episodes will feature a few of our partner schools, but Siembra Montessori and Montessori American Indian Child Care Center were really at the origins of the Montessori Partners movement. And so for Siembra Montessori, Roxana met Juanita, who was then the outreach director, and got connected to Molly. And through that relationship, they switched over the preschool classroom over at Centro Tyrone Guzman to be Montessori. And so then we've been working with them over the years to train their teachers and to build out their Montessori program. And they're opening their second Montessori classroom this summer, but they're really focused on Montessori as the best educational opportunity for the Latina children in Minneapolis, in Minnesota. And so they've really taken that and expanded across their programming. So they have a home visiting program that is working with Montessori principals. They have the youth and elder program who are making Montessori materials. So they've really just incorporated these principles that Molly talked about across their programming. And so we'll talk more with Deanna Alvarez tomorrow about what that looks like for their community. And then Montessori American Indian Child Care Center is really focused on providing high quality Montessori education for the Eastside American Indian community. And they've been open also since, I think, 2014. And so next week we'll talk to them about what that looks like, incorporating Montessori cultural values with American Indian values and philosophy, and how they've done that at their center. And then at the end of the month, we'll talk with Pastor Jessica Jackson and her mission to bring Montessori to Morning Glory Montessori, to open her doors for an Afrocentric, faith-based Montessori school for Black boys, which is really exciting. And then we have, so we have 10 partners in all. Acacia Montessori is in Apple Valley, and they really have a special focus on Somali culture. Cosmos Montessori is in South Minneapolis with a dual language Spanish and English focus. Lirio Montessori is also in South Minneapolis, dual immersion Spanish and English. Starflower Montessori is trying to get off the ground in North Minneapolis to serve the community there. Molly and I just got back. We spent 4 days last week in Pine Ridge Reservation to support Thunder Valley. They're really focused on Lakota immersion and using Montessori method with their Lakota life ways to build up their young, the next generation. And then Water Lily Montessori is in downtown St. Paul and serves a culturally diverse community there. So that's a little bit about our partners. We're always, the vision is to support access. So whatever that looks like, and where there are people committed to community and to supporting children, having access to that, to high quality Montessori, that's really at the core of our mission. And these are communities that have been historically, racially, and socioeconomically under-resourced, and are reclaiming this type of education as the education that aligns with their unique cultural values and addressing their specific community needs. And it's by them and it's for them, and they are it's using the strengths and assets of the community, and we are here to be partners in collaboration along that journey.
And I love that. I love the fact that you have a very stable vision of the Montessori way, I like to call it. I don't know if I am the one who decided that was gonna
you are the one who decided that.
Yeah. I like it too. I like it.
Yes. So to take the Montessori way, which is proven, which, you know, has been around for 100 years, and you know that it's successful, and then to be able to offer it to communities, to really take those principles and build upon it so that they're specific to their culture and connects them specifically to their community, is an amazing, amazing thing that you're doing, and which is why I love y'all, because you are taking it from the self to the family to the community and the neighborhood, and that is amazing. And I know maybe this is something that we should not talk about or could not, but what's the process? Like, if I'm, you know, the North Side school, they're in the process of becoming a partner. What do I do if I already have my wonderful daycare, but now I want to center it in Montessori, in the Montessori way? And let me just step back and say that we are, you know, MACMA is in no way endorsing the Montessori schools, but what we are doing is making sure that we are sharing options and opportunities that exist in communities throughout the Twin Cities. So I want to take a moment to say that I love y'all. That's that's my opinion. And I think that as we bring not only you all, but the other schools over the next few weeks, I think people are really going to fall in love with you guys too. But talk a little bit about what that process is. And I know we're getting close to an hour, so we won't take too much time on this. But what does that process look like?
Well, I think everything comes down to relationship, and it needs to be a partnership that is rooted in relationship and trust and understanding with each other. And so we really try to center our relationship with partners, not just between us and each partner, but between the partners as well. A lot of it is trying to, like, one of the biggest challenges in early childhood is finding bricks and mortar, especially in under-resourced communities. It's one of the hardest and most frustrating components, is finding either land that is available, whether it's on the north side, is it owned by the city? Now we have to buy it. And then figuring out, like, who is going to be able to fund the capital to build a classroom for our children. And there are some, you know, some state funding out there that can be accessed, but it's not always accessed. And so I think the biggest barrier, and Molly, you can jump in at any point, that I've seen with schools is finding a location, especially in under-resourced areas, that is affordable, that is safe, that is in community. And so that's bricks and mortar seems to be like one of the biggest challenges. So finding partners who are open to a lease, open to remodeling. Where does that money come from? And then teacher training is the second biggest piece of that. So maybe Molly, you want to jump in with your perspective there?
Yeah, it's important that the community that wants to either transition or build or start up a new Montessori environment, it's really important that they identify candidates for training from their community. Obviously we also, there's an application process and all of that, but we want it to come from them. I mean, currently we have 40% of our trainees identify as people of the global majority. So that's really important. So we want to find, and it's not always so easy. You'll probably hear this from some of the schools that you'll be talking to. Sometimes it's not that easy to find a candidate for training for various reasons. But we've been able to take away a lot of the barriers for teacher training, which has made it really accessible to them. We've actually provided $2.4 million in training scholarships over the years since we've been there. And so that has been crucial in order for a community to build or transition to a Montessori school. So I think location, and I know both Make and Morning Glory will talk about that, the challenges they had in finding an appropriate space that was affordable, and then having, train people who are trained, and not only the lead teacher, but we also have orientation courses for people who will be assistants in the training. I mean, in the school, excuse me, and that's about a 60-hour certificate program. So we also offer that because we want everyone in their community to kind of be on the same page and understand, the values and the approach that we take with children, because it is a little unusual for some. They weren't raised that way, and so there's kind of a learning curve. So those are two of the biggest obstacles, which I think we've successfully been able to help with. Each school has come to us with different dreams, with different barriers, with different successes, etc. So like everything, each school is so unique in how they become a Montessori school.
Well, and we know that when children enter into a space where the teachers look like them, where they have books, where they see themselves represented, where their cultural values are not just highlighted on a week or a month of the year, but like really celebrated and ingrained in them every day, their self-confidence skyrockets, their identity matters, and their sense of belonging helps them to feel safe to be able to learn and to thrive. And so this is really our goal, whether it's for children, for teachers, for families and communities, is really to, like Maria Montessori, to become and to belong. And communities have their own strengths and assets, and so we want to train the teachers from the communities and not send different people into those communities.
So when you look, so I'm sorry, Molly, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say one thing I hadn't mentioned is we have a partnership with Metropolitan State University. Many of their students are non-traditional students. So if somebody who does not have a bachelor's degree, which can prohibit them from working in certain schools, etc., we have a partnership where it's called prior learning credits. So if they take the academic year training, they get essentially a year's worth of college credit toward their BA, and it's either through the psychology or early education. And we've had that partnership from even before we moved. And so many people have taken advantage and been able to finish their bachelor's degree using those prior learning credits. So there's another thing we do to support, because it used to be that you had to have a bachelor's degree to take the training, but that we removed that barrier. But then we helped. How do you help them towards their educational goals? Because many of them, their goals are to get a bachelor's degree, but there's been many roadblocks that have made it impossible for them to do that. So that's one more thing we try to support.
That's awesome. So are you saying then that the majority of the teachers who work in Montessori schools have bachelor degrees and then specific training for Montessori schools?
I would say that's true, the majority, but more and more we are training people who don't yet have their bachelor's degree. Many have an associate's degree and they want to work towards their bachelor's degree. So that's what most end up with, yes.
I love that. I love that, because while you are an early childcare provider is what I think is a technical term for it in the field, what you provide is so much elevated. If I just went and sent my child to this daycare chain that I passed by on the way to work, it's so much elevated. And so what parents and caregivers get from Montessori is so much more than if they were just to choose some daycare center.
Well, I think that is definitely, like, when we look at challenges that we're facing, and Montessori is a piece of the broader early childhood field, but something that I often hear and feel from people working in the field, whether that was at Head Start or in Montessori, is just kind of a disrespect for the profession, and it's a highly skilled career field, and so that also means investing in our early childhood teachers and professionals, and doing that, through funding and budgets, and really showing our respect for the field is something that I can't repeat often enough.
Yes, absolutely. So we have covered really what the barriers are, people being able to find an actual home for their Montessori school is really high on the barrier list. And then being able to make sure that you have those quality teachers who are there serving your children, another barrier, because, there is specific training for Montessori schools.
Mm-hmm.
So how do y'all approach funding as we're wrapping this conversation up about what your challenges or barriers are? How do you approach funding for Montessori schools? And does that come as an umbrella through y'all, or is each school responsible for their own?
Each school is responsible for their own. We are not a fiscal, fiscal agent for the schools. And Minnesota is really leaps and bounds ahead of other states in terms of early childhood funding. And we're also barely moving the needle. And so a lot of our schools do access early learning pathway scholarships through the state, including Cornerstone and, the Great Start teacher retention grants that were passed last year through the state and were previously COVID retention payments. So it's a braiding of private and public funding, especially for our schools. I think the term private kind of scares people away, and which comes with a financial assumption, but most early childhood education centers in the state are what you would term to be private, and everyone accesses those public funds as much as possible to be able to supplement their income. And then, I don't know, Molly, maybe you want to jump in with some of our other.
For capital needs, many of the schools, not all of them, but many of them will have launch a capital campaign, and we have found that there are foundations and corporations and individuals who are very much aligned with the work and really have the same vision for young children. So, we raise significant amount of money through those various streams every year in order to support particularly our outreach programming, and also CMES. We also the Cornerstone. We also support the running of that school. So we do. There are many different ways to raise money, and so it's public private, as Nora said, but it's not easy. It's not easy. And it's so interesting. Montessori always said we save all our money for college, for our children to go to college, when the most important period of life is the first 6 years. And I think that we're coming, people like Art Rolnick and others who have built an economic case on why invest in early childhood. People are coming around to understanding, and with understanding how important these early years of life are. And Montessori was a medical doctor, but there was no like brain scans or any of those kinds of things, or MRIs. I mean, she knew mostly through her observations how children learn, and that's scientifically really being proven now in contemporary world. So she was a genius, that she was able to, she was a scientist and a doctor and then an educator. So it's it shouldn't be this hard, is what I always say. It shouldn't be this hard, where our children can get the best for the smallest, and during this really important period of development and that developing brain. That's what all children deserve. That all children deserve the best start in life, and we believe that these prepared environments help support the best start in life.
Well, and I think we're also just I think I've seen it called a quiet crisis for our workforce shortage, for teacher retention and recruitment, and that is, that's really worrisome. The 2023 workforce study by Wilder showed that we lost close to 4,000 childcare centers in the last decade. And so, and when we think about, children in these first 5 years, that's when we're starting to see the different diagnoses emerge and the different needs being coming up. And so we really need to be able to support our teachers with mental health services for the children and for the adults who are taking care of them in these spaces. And again, supporting teachers through higher wages and, reducing burnout rates. I think something that, as a social worker who's supporting the teachers and the children in this field, I'm just continually worried about the future of our workforce and ensuring that we have a healthy workforce to support our youngest children.
Right, which is really another big aspect of the infant and early childhood mental health field is their supervision, the reflective supervision that you give, that's offered to the providers, because as you know, the analogy is always, all right, as much as we pour into other people, how are we filling our pitcher back up as we empty it so much? So the fact that that is a part of the curriculum, that's a part of the service that you offer is also amazing. And let me just point out that when my son went to Montessori school, he went on scholarship. I didn't have to pay for him to go. And so however we as a community can support that, I would love to be able to give back, because my son was able to get such a great foundation. So it would be nice if we could talk a little bit about what can the community do to support what y'all are doing, even if we don't have our own children. How can the community support the work that you're doing?
Well, as someone who received reflective supervision with Early Head Start as part of the foundation of the programming, that really was a really crucial part of my professional growth and development, and why I stayed with Early Head Start for 6 or 7 years. And so I love the momentum that you all are pushing with reflective supervision, and I'm trying to do that with the Montessori community, and also pushing them towards you all who have more capacity to do that type of work with our teachers. And so I think that that's a really exciting aspect of what you all are doing. And then, especially with all the professional development that you provide for teachers, it's really, really fundamental to the success and retention of teachers in our field. And so, and I remember going to MACMH conferences back when I first started in the early 2010s. And so I've always that's always been something that I've appreciated about your organization and the supports that you provide. When I think about teacher self-care or social worker self-care, or anyone in the field with self-care, for me, it all comes back to community and co-care. And if we're not taking care of each other, if we don't have enough subs so that a teacher can take a mental health day, that's not working. Or if a teacher can't even take the day off because the school will have to close, or because they're feeling guilty not being that stable person in the environment, that's not actually supporting the teacher's mental health. And so for me, it all comes back to taking care of each other and showing up for each other. And there are so many different ways we can do that, but it's working better with each other, partnerships among different collaborations, whether it's ECSE, ECFE, you all. I think the more partnerships we have to be able to really weave in a fabric of support for each other, the better. And we also just have to be very intentional about our work with families. We can't do this work with children in isolation. We really need to be in partnership with families to be able to support their development. And so those are some of my ideas in how we support each other.
I mean, the very fact that we're doing this podcast together is supporting us in a very direct way. There are many people that have no idea about the work of the center. I've been able to give talks around the country and around the world, and we then start getting calls. How can we want this for our children? How can we do it, etc. So we're sowing seeds, the ripple effect. And I think just exposure like this is really helpful, because now somebody listening to this might say, oh, I had no idea about this, and that there's actually a training center right here in St. Paul. So all of this working in collaboration with others who have the same kind of aspirations for young children and strong mental health, etc., is really another way that the community is helping us, in especially you. We
Well, listen,
appreciate that.
yes, like I love y'all. I love you all, and being here, with MACMA, I just finished my first year, and it's been an amazing year.
Congratulations.
I
Yes,
thank you.
congratulations.
I feel, I feel like a veteran, but I still feel like a rookie as well. There's still so much to learn and to grow just myself personally in the field and understanding a little bit more. So I thank you all for taking your time and coming and talking with me. And let me just say real quick that you've been listening to a Minnesota Association for Children's Health podcast. We're leading with knowledge, compassion, and support. Please take a moment to follow our channel, subscribe, turn on notifications for future episodes and all that good stuff. And one of the things, I went through all of this stuff to make this a really fancy production, and I haven't used anything that I planned on using, but that's okay. We'll do it another time. I just want to, as we're wrapping this up a little bit, and I did look, I don't see any questions that came from the audience. So there are no questions to answer there, but let's talk specifically about Cornerstone and MCM. What's ahead for your school?
Well, we can, I think it's not only about Cornerstone. I think with stability is the number one thing to be able to safeguard the work and to continue it into the future. We don't see any great expansion at Cornerstone right now, adding classrooms and things like that, but we are hoping to add Montessori partners and to support new schools to begin as well.
Yeah, I think, when Molly says stabilization, I think the pandemic really highlighted a lot of holes in the infrastructure of early childhood. And so while the field has started to stabilize, I think that it's also imperative that we invest in our early childhood workforce to be able to serve children in the best way possible. And so that's looking at different staffing models, that's making sure that our teachers have benefits, that's looking at what other support services are needed in the early childhood field, and working more collaboratively with early childhood special ed teams. And so it's thinking outside the box and being innovative in how we are. I mean, when we talk about serving under-resourced communities, early childhood in general is under-resourced. And so that strain has become even more apparent over the last few years, even though it was pretty, if you're working in the field, pretty blatant before that. And so for us and for the collaborative, I'm really proud of the work that we've been doing. We meet quarterly throughout the year, and we bring up challenges that each of the schools is facing, and how do we come together and use each other's assets and strengths to really attack it in a way that that feels authentic to the communities that we are serving. And so we started the year off talking about teacher mental health, and we're ending it with some actionable items around supporting recruitment of subs. And so that feels exciting for a direction of what's next, is just taking these like really big, difficult topics and figuring out actionable ways to move forward using the wisdom of the people that we're working with, and not having to rely on the state for funding, but also making sure that we're advocating for policy change where needed too. So yeah, using our voice.
And the other thing is we're looking at different training models. We just began our first, what we call a hybrid or blended course. So it makes it more accessible for people who are working and can't move to Minnesota for 9 months in the training. And so there is some on site, of course, because it's a very hands-on method, but it's a combination of online and in person, which has allowed some of the trainees in this course right now, they would not have been able to do the training if they had to have it only in person. So we're looking at how can we, again, remove more barriers for people to have training. So that's something. And then we're going to look at, are there other things, other training programs that we can do? By programs, I mean, we also train at the elementary level, children ages 6 to 12. We also in the past have done assistance to infancy, which is training for children 0 to 3, etc. So we're looking at all the different offerings that we will be continuing to do as we move forward.
And I would just say we have a beautiful campus on east side of St. Paul. Email me anytime to come over or take a tour of the museum. Or if you are an organization and wants to partner, we have a great lecture room to host community events. So we, the more we can be out in community, the better.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And again, you can find all this information. Molly, we did not even talk about the articles that you provided, the books that you passed on to me, but those things will still be in our description. So Molly has contributed so many publications or articles to publications, and we've included some of those in the information that we're sharing with you as well.
Yeah, one that really stands out that we talked about, gave resource to you, is Montessori, the White Cross and Trauma-Informed Practice, Lessons for Contemporary Education. That's a good starting point.
Awesome. Say that one more time.
Yeah, the article is called Montessori, the White Cross and Trauma-Informed Practice, Lessons for Contemporary Education.
Awesome.
Good.
Thank you. So I've kept y'all for quite some time here. Do you have anything, last parting comment, something that you want to leave the audience with particularly? It can have something to do with Montessori or not.
Well, I think what I always try to leave with is, please think about these early years of life, because they are so critical in the child's future and how life will be for them. So anything that we can do as a community collectively to safeguard those early years of children's life, I think is the best thing that we can do.
Yeah, I'll echo that. And it's been really fun to talk to you about the work that we're doing.
Well, thank you so much for joining again our guest, Molly and Nora from the Montessori Center of Minnesota. Thank you so much. I know that I have learned a lot today, but I think the biggest thing that stands out is what you said earlier, is that one of the values that you have is the deep respect for each individual child. And in the moment, it doesn't sound like, oh, but we should be team building, or, well, why are we thinking about individualism and all of those things? But it's really important for each person to be very comfortable in who they are as an individual person. So I think that stood out to me the most during this conversation.
Good. Well, thank you again.
All right.
And good luck with the next chapters.
Yes, I'm so excited. So I will let you all go, and I'll just give a little blurb to everyone else about what we can expect tomorrow and in the weeks coming. So thank you again. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Lana.
All right. All right. So thank you again. I really do appreciate you coming and listening to what Molly and Nora had to share with us. I love the fact that Montessori schools are so focused on making sure that they are developing our children in every way and include such a big part of their mental health in it. It's one thing to learn 1, 2, 3s and your ABCs and your colors, but to really connect with our children's individual Personalities is what we're taught in this world, right? Everyone has their own personality. And believe it or not, by the time your child is 6, they really have established a lot. And so it's important that we focus on our children when they're young. Again, we're going to be here for 3 more episodes. This is a 4-part series. I appreciate you joining us today. We'll be back tomorrow with Siembra. Carlos Guzman. And then the week after that, we have the Montessori MACMH is what they call themselves, but they are the Minnesota American Indian Community Center. And then the week after that, we have Morning Glory Montessori that will be with us. So tomorrow, and then the next 2 weeks after that, so every Wednesday in June, we'll be bringing you the Montessori way. So again, thank you. You've been listening to the Minnesota Association for Children's Mental Health podcast. We're leading with knowledge, compassion, and support. Please take a minute to follow our channel, subscribe, turn on notifications for future episodes, all of those amazing things. You can find more information about us at macmh.org, macmh.org. Again, thank you, and see you tomorrow.